Hello, crafty friends, and welcome to my channel, Create with Kalia. I'm Kalia. Today I'm going to be scrapbooking these pictures, which I took of an interesting time I had while I was working as a wildland firefighter. This video is also a collaboration to help celebrate Crafty Concepts with Erin's 30,000 YouTube subscriber milestone. We're celebrating Erin Jacobson by scraplifting some of her layouts that she's completed in the past. The layout I'm choosing to scraplift, Erin used this same Take to the Skies paper and pictures of a train expedition that she took with her family. I looked at the same copper clay paper that Erin used to create some strips across her layout, and while I like that because it goes well with my skin tone, I don't like that it doesn't go as well with the green of the train. Instead, I chose to use this garden green stripe paper from the Nests of Winter DSP. As of the publication of this video, both of these paper collections are still available on my website. However, the Take to the Skies paper is on low quantity and I do not know if it will be back. I'm going to use the same smoky slate cardstock that Erin used behind her photos in her layout. I really like that this helps pick up the smoke that was in the air during this particular fire assignment. A link to Erin's video and all of the supplies that I used for my layout will be included in the video description, so make sure to check that out. I did consider bringing in the Weekend Adventures scrapbooking kit papers. I really liked this print in particular with the compasses and the boot prints on it. However, I didn't want to bring in as much of the brown tones to my layout. I really want to use the map paper to the left with the topographic lines on it for this layout because the grays and blues better match the tone I'm trying to set with my layout. I've cut down the gray cardstock to 6.5 by 12. The map paper, I've cut 4 strips at 1 inches. And the green stripe, I've cut 2 strips at 1 inch and 2 strips at 1.5 inches. I'm going to be building my layout on white willow cardstock, so let me get that spread out here and we'll start building the layout. I'm going to set out my gray cardstock first, and then I'm putting the blue strips at the top of my page. You'll notice that I flipped the strip around here. That's because as you look to the right-hand side of the strip, you see that the topographic lines spread out a little bit. I feel like the closer lines help bring some interest into the center of my layout, and so I want to make sure that the lines that are further apart are to the far right of my page. Next, I'm going to lay down my green strips, and I'm going to gauge how much space I actually need in order to fit all of my photos onto the layout. Just as Erin did, I'm going to step the green stripe in just a little bit from the edge of the cardstock to help create some additional visual interest. I'm going to lay my photos back out on the cardstock so that I can check how much space I actually need and how much I need to trim off of the gray cardstock. These pictures were taken while I was on a fire assignment in Montana in the Flathead National Forest. At that time, both the Flathead and Glacier National Park had a lot of fires happening in them. And on this particular day, we were brought into the location where we would be working by riding on a train. As you can see, we were standing outside on a platform right along a rail for the entire train ride. The picture that I'm working with now, I really do want to include on this layout, but I'm finding I'm running out of room. All of my pictures are 4 by 6, which is also not leaving me a lot of room to include both embellishment clusters and journaling. I decide that I'm going to use one of our 4 by 6 flip flaps to include both the picture and the journaling. I put the picture with the tunnel on top because I like that it gives a better sense of the fact that this was a train ride that we were taking, and I like that we're going into a tunnel. I start inking around the edges of all of my photos and papers with my basic gray ink pad. You can see that that helps the photo pop off of the gray just a little bit more. And I don't want to mat every single one of these photos, so I'm going to use this trick instead. My tip is to make sure to do your photos first to give them some extra time to dry, and then do your cardstock and papers after your photos are complete. For this layout, I inked around all four sides of the gray cardstock, but left the edge at the center of the page on the blue and green DSP uninked, as that helps it feel more like it's one continuous piece of paper once I put my layout into my album. Just like Erin did, I decided that I do want to bring in some black cardstock and mat a couple of my photos with the black. I feel like that helps give some additional interest, and there is a lot of black in my photos with our helmets and our packs. I cut down the cardstock so that I have just barely an eighth of an inch border around my photos. I'm also going to put my picture into the flip flap. As you can see, it does take a little bit of force to get the picture into the flip flap. However, I'm also very gentle with it so that I don't bend or crease my photo. If you've never used a flip flap before, this will attach to the outside of my page protector. Next, I'm ready to bring in my stamp sets and start creating my embellishment clusters. The Greatest Adventure stamp set with the train engine is unfortunately no longer available. I've also brought in some other stamp sets that I think have some sayings or images that I will be able to use for this layout. I'm going to start with stamping the engine with my basic gray stamp pad onto some scrap White Daisy cardstock. This is a cling stamp, and when you receive these, there is a sticker sheet on the inside of the stamp case that you will attach to the stamp. The stamps then cling on to your clear stamping block. I'm going to ink up the stamp really well and then stamp directly onto my white willow cardstock. One of the reasons that Stampin' Up! Continues to produce cling stamps is that they feel like they can get better detail using cling stamps than photopolymer. I do really like how much detail there is in this particular stamp. I fussy cut around my image using my paper snip scissors and then start to think about where I want to place it on my layout. Erin had put the train on the right-hand side of her page. However, that's because she had an engine picture on the left-hand side. Since I don't have a picture of an engine, I like the idea of using this as my main focal point for my biggest embellishment cluster. I'm going to be using some die-cut pine trees for part of my embellishment clusters, just like Erin. So I start bringing in my different green cardstock to test out which one I think will work best with my layout. I decide to go for the same garden green that's part of the straight paper to create my embellishment clusters. I'm going to be using dies from the Scenic Adventure set. I'm going to use the pine trees just like Erin did. However, I'm also going to include the mountain range set. I thought about using this die of the pine tree row along the bottom edge of my layout. Erin had used them along the top edge of hers. However, I'm not sure that that's the look that I'm going for. I cut out a number of pine trees using the garden green two-tone cardstock. So you can see that I have both the true shade and the lighter shade of garden green. However, what I'm finding is that the embellishment cluster is falling a little bit flat for me. So I also bring in some granny apple green and cut out additional pine trees using that. You can see that this die is unique in that it doesn't cut fully through the cardstock. This allows for the opportunity to create as much of a bottom border as you'd like to of your image. I've die cut the mountain range out of both basic gray and more smoky slate, and now I'm building up my cluster using some different layers to see what I like. What I do on one side of the page, I like to replicate in some way on the other side of the page as well. It would feel strange to me if the mountain range just ended on the left-hand side and we had no additional images of it on the right-hand side. So I've cut out two of the smaller part of the mountain range and bring that over to my right-hand page. I really like how this looks right next to the photo. I also realized that it looks a little strange that my mountain range would just end at the edge of the left-hand page. So you can see that I move that over so that it falls behind my photo just a little bit as well. When I glue this down, I will cut off the edge of the mountain range and then glue the part that I've cut off to the right-hand page to help it feel continuous across the layout. I now bring in more of the Granny Apple Green and realize that maybe I do want to include that tree line just as Erin had done on the top of the page. I feel like there isn't quite enough, and it will also help bring that granny apple green up to the top of the page for my embellishment cluster area there. I'm bringing in my mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine so that I can cut out the mountain range. This is my very first time using this one, and I'm so excited to try out the mini. I do have the larger version and absolutely love it. I found a 1-inch scrap piece of Granny Apple Green cardstock, and I'm going to use that to cut out my tree line. I've already measured, and I only need one section of the tree line for the right-hand side of my page. As I cut that out, I realized that 1 inch wasn't quite enough for me to get the bottom layer of trees, and some of them did cut off, but I'll still be able to use them for my layout. I placed that next to my mountain range and kind of going between and behind, and I absolutely love the way that looks. So I'm going to cut out more of the tree line. You can see that I leave the very edge of the die cut hanging off of the edge of the plate so that the die does not cut all the way through to end the tree line. I run the die through my machine and take it out, and then I move the cardstock over, line up the die with where I want the rest of the tree line to begin, and run it through my machine one more time. This cuts out a long enough section of tree line for me to be able to use on the left-hand side of my page. The type of fire crew I was on was not one that uses engines. Instead, we're a wildland crew that would hike into areas where fire was with all of our gear in order to complete our assignment for the day. We most often went to areas where there weren't roads and engines couldn't access the fire area in order to complete our work. This particular day, the area where we were going to be working was so far from a road that a decision was made to allow us to ride the train into an area where it was safe for us to then hike the rest of the way into the fire. Well, this wasn't my first time riding a train. It was definitely the first time that we were brought into a fire assignment on a train, and it was the only time I've been able to ride on the outside area of the train while we were moving. The train did move very slowly to make sure that we stayed safe. As you can see, I'm now bringing the die cut tree line up into the top portion of my left-hand page. I really like the way that this is looking as well. And I like having the tree line tucked in between the mountain range to help give some additional interest to that embellishment cluster. I grab a few of the pieces that were cut off from my first die cut so that I'm able to bring the tree line across the entire layout and really like the way that this is looking. Yellow is a color I don't often use in my scrapbooking because it doesn't match the skin tones of my family very well. However, since we're all wearing our fire-resistant shirts referred to as yellows in the pictures, I thought that it would be nice to bring some yellow into my embellishment cluster areas. I bring out my Spotlight on Nature dies and cut out some circles using the brand new Darling Duckling cardstock. It is the perfect shade of yellow to match my pictures. I put the circles behind my embellishment clusters and realize that the larger circles overwhelm the embellishment clusters that I've already created. I use a smaller die to cut out another circle and place that about halfway behind the green stripe paper on the right-hand side. I realize that that brings in the yellow that I'm wanting to include in my embellishment cluster without overwhelming the cluster and like that much better. I end up cutting the circle in half and including half behind the right-hand side of my page and half behind the left-hand side of my page in different areas. Then I remember that I have the Happy Labels Pick-a-Punch. If you've never used one of our Stampin' Up! Punches, there is a lock on the bottom that you need to make sure that you release in order to activate the ability to punch. You then can lock the punch back down in order to store it away. I cut my cardstock a hair's width less than 1 inch and then punch out each of the ends of my cardstock. I love this punch because there's two different options to create ticket looking ends on your cardstock. I use the one that's more of the typical ticket looking on my yellow piece of cardstock, thinking that I'll put one end behind each side of my page where I currently have the circles. I also love that this fits so well with the idea of taking a train ride. I've already started gluing things into place, and so I do need to work a little bit to get the half circle out from behind the left-hand side of my page, but I do manage to remove the half circle. I then recut the punch to give myself a little bit longer strip of the ticket. I then bring in some basic gray cardstock and use the other side of the punch to create the other ticket end. I like that this will also help me bring some basic gray into my two embellishment clusters on the far right and far left hand side of my page. I really am liking the way that the ticket end looks and that it's bringing just a pop of the yellow and the basic gray into my embellishment clusters. I'm going to play around with the two ticket ends that I've cut out until I get them kind of where I would like them. I realize that putting the gray behind the tree actually helps mute the tree down more than I would like to. So I move that up and let the white cardstock help show off the edges of the tree. Instead, I move the two ticket ends up just a little bit so they still feel cohesive to the rest of the embellishment cluster, but also allow the trees to stand on their own. I really like the way that this looks and I'm very happy with the placement of this. I realized that the yellow half circle behind my other embellishment cluster is going to be harder to remove because the trees are on top of it. So I decide that I can leave that because the embellishment clusters don't need to match exactly. I still use the basic gray ticket end, and that means that I've now brought all of the colors into the two clusters. I do have a plan for the cluster at the top, so don't worry. I've been looking at the Tags to Go You're Going Places stamp to include on this layout because I love a good pun. However, I decide to use a stamp from the Weekend Adventures set that says Taking the Scenic Route. I feel like that's a perfect subtitle for this adventure. I ink up my stamp really well with my black Memento ink pad and then stamp directly onto some white willow cardstock. I make sure to clean my stamp right away to help prevent any staining and then return it to the carrier sheet. You can see that I've once again used the punch to stamp out the ticket end. I then cut off the edge of the white willow cardstock and tuck it behind the gray cardstock just slightly to place it exactly where I want this piece. I've cut out my title All Aboard using black cardstock and the alphabet a la mode dies. You can see that the spacing of all is a little bit strange, and that's because I had already put my trees down and needed to work around that. That's a mistake that I made that I've decided I can live with. Next, I pull out my 2025 to 2027 in color flat pearls in Darling Duckling and my earth tone gems in Garden Green. The earth tone shimmer gems are currently a last chance item, so make sure you get them off the website before they're gone. I start to place gems around my embellishment clusters and am really liking the way that this looks. It helps bring in more of both the green and the darling duckling to my embellishment clusters. I start to put green gems on the Taking the Scenic Route piece and realize that I don't need more green right there. So I pick that one back up and move it over to my right hand embellishment cluster. Instead, I'm going to place two of the Darling Duckling shimmer dots on the Taking the Scenic Route tag to help bring some of the Darling Duckling all the way over to that part of my page. Since I haven't included any of the darling duckling in the upper embellishment cluster yet, I'm going to make sure I include some of the shimmer gems up there. It helps bring just enough of the yellow to the top of the page without overwhelming it, and again, making it feel like all of the embellishment clusters look exactly the same. As you can see, with the embellishment clusters located where they are, I've created three different visual areas called the visual triangle that help bring your interest in your eye across the page. I'm going to place a few more of these gems and then I'm going to consider the embellishment clusters done. I do still need to complete the journaling, which I will do at a later time and include in the back side of my flip flap. Again, if you've never used a flip flap before, there are a few different ways that you can attach them to your layout. Flip-flops are made of a very sturdy plastic, the same as your scrapbook protector pages, and include a strip of very strong adhesive to help them stick to your page or to your layout. You simply add your photos, journaling, or whatever you want to include in the flip flap inside. Fold over the flap to make sure that the adhesive side will be against your page or against your layout, and then peel off the white backing strip. You want to make sure that you don't touch the adhesive because it is extremely strong and sticky, but you also want it to be able to hold to your page. If you've enjoyed watching this video, please make sure to hit that like button and also subscribe to my channel. That helps me know what videos you're enjoying and what to see more of, and it also helps my video reach other crafters just like you. I also have a private group on Facebook where I share more content and more of the projects that I'm working on. So if you want to join that group, we would love to have you there as well. I'm going to finish placing these gems, moving some things around just a little bit to make this look a little bit more what I'm wanting. And then I think I'm done with this layout. Here's how it compares to the layout that Erin created. I feel like I've done a pretty good job of replicating the design that Erin came up with while also making the layout mine and fitting it to the pictures that I chose to use. I'm so excited to celebrate Erin and her accomplishment, and I'm so happy with how this layout turned out overall. I hope you will take this as inspiration to scraplift a layout that you love. If you'd like to see close-ups, make sure to check out my Instagram. Thanks for watching, and craft on!